Welcome to the Atlas Talks with your host, Deborah Atlas. Suzanne Bernier is an internationally recognized disaster management expert and emergency management consultant. She has helped governments and communities plan for and respond to disasters for over 20 years and is CEO of SB Crisis Consulting. In 1998, Suzanne was recognized with the Amethyst Award for Outstanding Achievement on behalf of Ontario, Canada, for her work with the ice storm of the century. Suzanne Bernier's vast experience was the basis of her book, Disaster Heroes, Invisible Champions of Help, Hope, and Healing.
Welcome to the Atlas Talks, Engaging with Depression, and my guest today is Suzanne Bernier. And Suzanne's credentials are amazing. She's a former journalist, a former government press secretary. She is the CEO of SB Crisis Consulting and is a disaster management expert. She's an award-winning crisis management consultant, and she's also the author of what has got to be a very amazing book. It's called Disaster Heroes, Invisible Champions of Help, Hope, and Healing. I could go on and on and on about your credentials, but I'd like you to do a little bit of talking.
Sure.
So, as a journalist myself, I know that it can lead you places, but what led you from that? And I can see that the progression to press secretary, actually that came up, somebody asked me to do it and I declined, but so I can see that progression.
Right.
How did
I get from that to a
how did you do that major leap?
Especially back in the day, because back then, this was before 9/11, before Hurricane Katrina. I didn't even know that there was an emergency management agency until I was a press secretary, and then I left to go into the civil service. And then they gave me the public safety portfolio to be the media person for. And one of those offices was the Office of Emergency Management for our, state/province, depending on where people are.
Right.
And so as a press secretary for them, I realized, there's these amazing people who go out and save communities during disasters. I don't want to talk about what these people do. I want to be one of these people. So I went to the director, I asked him, there was some trepidation because they had never hired a woman in a field officer role that would be deployed, on her own or on our own. So there was a little bit of pushback, but then I argued that, what does it really mean, my safety against somebody else's safety that's in there by themselves and might have a heart attack or something.
Yeah.
So they gave me the position. And so that's what made me the first female emergency management field officer in our province. And so I spent about 5 years just going to disaster, everything from train derailments to forest fires, to the flooding of communities, to, of course, the 9/11 terror attack. I was on this side, so on the Canadian side of the border, but working with officials to be able to set up to feed and water those who'd been in lines for a long time because they closed down the borders. We had to figure out how to work with companies to get porta potties set up every so often throughout there, and all sorts of different things that, you need people like us in the background to think of all that stuff and have that already. People kind of just assume, okay, all that gets done, but there's a big, pool of people and resources that all get together from all types of different backgrounds to be able to help rebuild after a disaster.
Wow. It's really remarkable, the path that you've taken. You have been involved in not only 9/11, but Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, the H1N1 pandemic, the 2003 Northeast blackout. And I know that from having talked to several other people and knowing people who were involved in 9/11 and involved in disasters, that there's a great, emotions are high. You're running on adrenaline, and you don't have time to think. But in the midst of it and everything around you, it's got to hit you and got to have an impact. Can you talk about that? I know that it's high stress job.
Yeah,
high stress dealing with people who are dealing with stress. So
that's right.
tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I kind of would call this session, I guess, depression and disasters.
Mm,
Because a lot of the planners who plan for how they're going to respond to a disaster and get things back up and running, a lot of the time they don't think about the possibility of depression and mental health aspects that should be dealt with. And sometimes, a lot of the time, that's missed. And I think that should be something that every community at least thinks about. Providing better mental health resources, and not themselves maybe, but at least pointing them in the right direction of where to go, what to look out for, what to watch for, and then who to contact if you're feeling these kinds of things. I've seen it work in a couple of communities after disasters, and I've seen it fail because it wasn't done at all
mm,
for other communities and disasters. Specifically where I think we're going to see so much more, I guess, indirect deaths long after, particularly active shooter incidents. We're
yeah.
already seeing them, where in San Bernardino, it was only 5.5 years ago, but it feels like a lifetime ago because there's been so many of them since. But take something like that into account if that happened, and it could very well happen. And I think we're going to see more of people taking bad actions due to depressive states,
Yeah.
specifically because of the pandemic and the hardships and all of the different things that are going around throughout this 20-month period now. And we're looking for, at least another half a year, probably at least, of this too. And so that as well, I think, is pushing people into deeper depression. And then you add on the alienating people because they have to stay at home, they have to isolate, all of that stuff mixed in with just normal life. I think just really had a big impact on a lot more people than if the pandemic didn't happen.
I think you're right. Depression, the numbers of reported cases of depression and suicides has gone up dramatically since the pandemic began. And they're also saying that those numbers are underreported.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, exactly.
and, people are so tired of isolating that they're ready to party, which
Right.
now we've got variants happening, and it's very, very concerning. And in the midst of that, we've got these other disasters happening. I know that, how do you keep your balance in the midst of this?
Well, sometimes I don't until I have a chance to. A lot of the time when I'd be doing my work and then going to speaking and stuff, I was kind of zipping from time zone to time zone. And after a while, I thought it was just maybe the time zones that were screwing my body up.
Mm,
But then I realized after the pandemic gave me a chance to sit still for a moment and kind of look over things and look over my mental well-being and how I felt, and recognize that it wasn't as good as it was before the pandemic. And for myself, I think there were reasons, like because I had done the planning for our original pandemic influenza that we were planning for back in 2005. So
yeah.
we pretty much predicted everything that was happening. And it was just very depressing to me, sad, I guess, to realize that all of the great work we did back then was obviously forgotten and didn't exist or wasn't used. So that was really, really depressing for me in my career, seeing this happen. And then I'd be contacted by media, being interviewed on my take on it and stuff. But then I didn't want to be very negative towards the government, because that's not good either.
Right.
So yeah, it was very challenging, and I definitely did go into depression. And it was just, I think, driven by the pandemic and feelings of guilt, even though, I never thought that I would feel guilt, I guess, from something like that, but I did. It was very different.
I know being human in the midst of all of that is the toughest thing to do. I know that, I've dealt with depression since I was a toddler. I'd pretty much gotten to where I can manage it. It's not a big issue anymore. I know what to do. I know what to look for. And then the pandemic hit. And like everyone else, I stopped and I started going down that road. And after about 2.5 months, I said, okay, that's enough. Now, what can I do to help myself step out of that? And for me, it was, I'm a home gardener. And I doubled my gardens. I went, okay, great, let's go work in the dirt. That helps me feel.
Nice.
I spent more time training my dog and, teaching him new things. And so how did you pull yourself out of that pathway?
I guess it was to recognize, well, actually, I had a colleague / friend of mine ask me once, because in a lot of the work that I've been doing, well, volunteer work that I've been doing over the past few years is working with active shooter survivors, mostly in the US. Because that's where most of them happen, unfortunately. Yeah. But so when I was talking to my friend, and everybody has kind of been worried about me over my path for the last few years because I just been doing so much, and a lot of it is negative, dealing with negative things. Yeah. So my colleague said to me, an active shooter occurrence had happened, and every time an active shooter incident happens, this is how I'm affected, even though I wasn't part of one, is I've heard all of the stories. I know everything that everybody experienced in those rooms or in that place or wherever from people describing it to me. So I still see it, even though I didn't see it, because I'm getting firsthand information from all of these trauma survivors. But I didn't realize that I would bring that back with me. So every time I was back home, I'd be sad all the time. I didn't really know why. And I guess it was just because I needed to see that I was helping, and being here, I wasn't helping anybody, but then I wasn't helping myself either. And that's kind of what my friend told me was, don't you have your friends that are the active shooter survivors, don't they have families? And I go, yeah. And he said, well, didn't you tell me that they're pretty good families and that they support them and everything? I said, yeah. And he goes, well, where's your family? And I don't really have a family, right? And so, but just that thought that he made me think about, I thought, oh, yeah. And so then it was great, because then that at least provided me with less anxiety to think that I have to go and call and check in on my other active shooter survivors to make sure they're not traumatized, re-traumatized by this new event. Well, now at least I can put that aside and say, no, they all have family and friends and they're okay. So, but it was tough to pull away.
I want to highlight that, expand on it a little bit more, because, people like you, like me, who are involved in emotional stuff where we've got depression coming at us as an aftermath that we don't expect, that we don't anticipate. It's so crucial to reach out to other people and as you said, get involved in that particular aspect. And that helped you begin to get out of your own path leading away from depression. People don't always recognize how important it is that when you see that things have gotten dark, you need to reach back out to other people and allow them, the interaction. That's what I'm trying to get at, is the interaction is so vital.
Yeah, definitely. And something that was so missed throughout the whole, well, not the whole pandemic, but throughout parts of the pandemic anyway.
Yeah, very much so. Yes.
You mentioned 9/11 earlier. I just wanted to also mention that we're seeing from 9/11, we have seen secondary trauma and deaths, throughout the years as well. And similarly for not as large an event, but the largest active shooter event is the Vegas event. And
what year was that?
That was in 2017.
Wow.
So yeah. I went there too afterwards, but we're going to see a lot because there's so many people. There are only 70 people in total involved with San Bernardino, but with the Las Vegas concert, there was hundreds of people in attendance. And how do you deal with monitoring their mental health symptoms if they're all from different places and then they all go off and go home afterwards? But then they're bringing with them their trauma and their depression, and then spreading it throughout the community through their direct contacts. And so it's a huge thing that affects the whole community, even just having that kind of a scenario happening with, you know, a group of people who are bound to be depressed.
Yeah, and the impact that that has, and you can only hope that they reach out to friends and family members on their own, but they won't necessarily. And what impact will that have on your community? I want to talk about community for a minute, because you work not only with government entities, but you work with communities, with Katrina, with Hurricane Sandy, with the blackouts, with the active shooter situations. Tell me about the resources that are available for communities for mental health, because that has to be part of the crisis management package, I imagine.
Yes, it does. And it's not right now, but it should be. But FEMA does have some resources that can be accessed online. I'm trying to think of other places to go. But FEMA has for people who are interested on all sorts of topics you can think of, but related specifically to emergencies or disasters. But we have a wide range of different resources that are all free that people can take.
So anybody involved in a disaster situation, whether it's hurricanes, earthquakes, active shooter, any of those things that you've been involved in, they can contact FEMA and find out about these resources, mental health resources, et cetera?
Yeah, they wouldn't contact them. FEMA has a designated like website or page for it, where people can go and access. And the same thing with a lot of community public health authorities and stuff have that as well.
Oh, that's great. I'm very sure that people don't know about that. So thank you very much for that. I want to bump over to your book, and something that you've said that, you know, you talk about one idea making a difference. I've said it for years differently. I've said it as in one person, because I know so many times I hear about people saying, well, I'm just one person and what can I do? And yet I look out into the world and realize some amazing innovations and solutions and remarkable accomplishments have happened because one person said, wait a minute, I have an idea. And that idea mushroomed into something remarkable. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, how did you get to where you wrote the book? I know as a writer myself, sometimes you don't choose it, it chooses you. And I don't know if case for you. Want to talk about that, and then tell me a little bit about some of the people that you profiled.
Yeah, sure. Well, I got the idea about writing the book when I first landed in New Orleans after Katrina, and I had, like everybody else, had just been, you know, looking at what the news reports were and stuff. So there was still reports aired that there would be looting and different things going on. And so then when I get there, I kind of prepared myself mentally for having to be aware of that. But then I got there and it was nothing like that in ground zero at all in New Orleans. It was a bunch of people, and I was a part of the team as well, but there was a bunch of us that were from a local firefighter who lost his home, to a local resident who just felt compelled to help because that's what he does, to just, sorry, I just lost it for a second.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, what was the question again?
Tell me, how did you come to writing the book? So you
yeah. Okay, sorry.
About some of the people that you wrote about.
Right, yeah. So yeah, how I got the idea was I was doing some work to rebuild a fire hall, which was the last fire hall to still be rebuilt. And so I got assigned to a team, and within the team, there were firefighters as well as just local residents, as well as people from far away, as well as people from the conference that I was speaking at, to everybody in between. And it was just such a wonderful gathering of people. And I realized how it was so different than what the images portrayed and were still portraying on the news. And I thought, people need to hear about these stories. And I know that the media can't share it. It's not just, there's the attitude that people like more depressing things, but I'm not sure about that. All I know
Neither am I. Yeah, all I know is that I wanted to share some of these awesome stories. And specifically the one man that I met who I'd mentioned that he was a resident there and just came in to help. He told me his story about how he helped New York. New York. And then during 9/11, and then what happened 2 or 3 times later because of this one man. Just a really, really cool story. And he's basically the one who inspired me to write the book. I wanted to tell his story. I needed people to hear that story. And then from there, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to, see if I can look out for others, like other ordinary heroes that I wanted to talk to. And then a couple of colleagues hooked me up with a couple of them as well. So I got them from all different areas and was able to speak one-on-one with each of them except one. So that was wonderful to be in their presence for a whole day, to have them talk about their experiences as well. What else was the question? Sorry. That's okay. There's so much information. I understand. A couple of the stories, I did a little research. I watched a couple of videos, and you talked about Ronnie Goldman and the Spirit of Louisiana. And
that's him. That's the man that inspired me.
Yeah, say a little about that. And then another person you interviewed that really inspired you as well.
Okay, sure. So a little bit about Ronnie Goldman. After 9/11, Ronnie and his wife were sitting in the kitchen making coleslaw. They're watching then President Bush deliver his first address on Ground Zero. And you might remember that scene where there was a firefighter beside him and his arm around him, and he was speaking on what looked like a pile of rubble. And so when Ronnie was listening in, and then the camera panned out, he noticed what the president was standing on, and he realized he was standing on the remnants of a burned out fire truck. So then Ronnie remembered hearing about there were almost 100 service vehicles who were lost that day as well, but that wasn't, of course, getting much coverage, but it still was an important aspect to deal with, because now not only do they have this massive disaster to clean up with, but they have a city that's still going on where they still need these response vehicles. So Ronnie thought, we can't let these terrorists win. We're going to raise some money and try to build back the New York City Fire Department. And so the next day he had an idea to call a local radio talk show, and he kind of put his idea out there. And then before you know it, he raised enough money to be, and this was after September 11th. So before Christmas, he was able to deliver a brand new full decked out fire truck called the Spirit of Louisiana. And it made its way all the way from New Orleans to New York City. But that's not the end of the story. That's where the story supposedly ends. But then something else happens. Hurricane Katrina, 4 years later, happens in Ronnie's backyard. Well, during that incident, the same amount of firefighters who lost their lives in New York City during 9/11, the same number came back to New Orleans, accompanying the Spirit of Louisiana to give back to them.
I didn't catch that detail when I was listening to the original video. I didn't catch that. Wow.
I might have not said that part. And then there's a third part that happened. So when I wrote the book, those were the two things that happened with the spirit. But the third thing happened was the spirit of Louisiana was then retired and put into a fire museum in Baton Rouge, I believe. Then Hurricane Sandy happened. What did they do? They recommissioned the spirit, pulled her out, brought her all the way back to New York City, where she helped rebuild after Hurricane Sandy.
I'm getting goosebumps.
What a great guy. And he's so down to earth, and you'd never know he's a hero, a double hero, triple hero, whatever it is.
Real heroes are that way. Real heroes
Right?
are that way. You never know. You would never.
Yeah. And how you were saying, this is one person, how one person, you know, if you say, well, what can one person do?
Right.
This is what one person did. A great example of that. So I was so excited about that I just had to write the book. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to write maybe 10 stories. And then I found a few that were really interesting. And another few I, canvassed people for. One was the mayor of the community that I canvassed, and she gave me an idea. So it's really, really great. I didn't choose anybody myself. I wanted the community or somebody close to choose them.
I didn't realize that. That's very special. That's
yeah.
It involves the whole community in the book, so that they feel like it's theirs.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Tell me about another of the unsung heroes that you wrote.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about Jeff Parness and something called the New York Says Thank You Foundation. So I wrote, so he was one of my other heroes I focused on, and his story is he and his son, younger son at the time, and the family raised money, as well as sponsored toys and all different things, and drove them across country in a U-Haul to say New York says thank you to California for what they've done. And now that California was going through a wildfire, they gathered all these donations up and they drove this van, and it was supposed to be just a one-time only. You put this banner on saying New York thank you. And so they drive across the country. This is 2003 now, during the California wildfire, and they get there. And then by the time they come back, there's so many people that think this is such an amazing thing that they're doing, that it just kept going every year. So what they were doing was every year on the 9/11 anniversary, they would round up police officers, firefighters, first responders who were impacted by 9/11, and they'd offer them an opportunity to go to another community somewhere in America to be able to rebuild something that was destroyed by a disaster there. And the whole meaning around it was New York says thank you. You helped us during 9/11. We're going to help you now during your emergency.
I've actually heard about this, and I didn't know that's what I was hearing about. I have a friend who lost her brother. He was a firefighter and lost him to 9/11. She mentioned something about this at one point, but I didn't know that this was a majorly organized thing that had a name. I didn't know.
Right. Yeah, and then the other thing that they've done, which is a program, an offshoot program from that, which has been, and talk about being able to help boost someone's mental health, and an idea how to do that after a disaster. So Jeff came up with this other concept of whenever he'd go to a disaster and it was all gray, and especially with fires or something where things burned out and stuff. So he would get, well, you see the little star behind me there?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so that's called a star of hope. So we'd get a bunch of stars, or he'd get a bunch of stars, and get kids and volunteers to paint whatever they thought would make them smile if they were in an emergency. And so it could be a word, could be colors, could be a rainbow, whatever it is. It's been like fabulously effective, where now we go to active. So that's how I connected with the active shooter survivors in San Bernardino, was we went to plaster the gate where it happened. And we plastered that gate with 1,000 stars of hope that were painted by people across America and Canada. And then a couple of weeks later, a woman who was one of the survivors contacted Jeff to say thank you for the stars and invited us to do a paint with them back in San Bernardino. And so little did I know that I was going to meet them after, 2 months after the attack happened. I was in a room with all, survivors or those who'd lost their family members. And some of them said that that was the first time they were all together again.
Wow.
Since the event. And
Wow.
so it was a good gathering thing, but also it was very healing to them. They're painting stars that are now going to other survivors. So the stars that they were painting that day we were there was just an event in Texas. So they decided they were going to bring those to Texas. We also did large paints after the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting.
Yes.
And who I should mention is a hero now. So the fellow who was the manager of Pulse nightclub on the day of that attack, the night of that attack, he is now, of course, there's no Pulse nightclub anymore, but now he has become the executive director of the New York Says Thank You Foundation. And how we even got to meet Josh was that he was given a star by someone from San Bernardino. And anyway, and now he has turned from a victim of the Orlando nightclub to the executive director of the New York Says Thank You Foundation. It just happened last week.
Wow. Wow. How wonderful. Which once again proves the point that you never know what one action that you take will have, what kind of effect it will have. The ripples are amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So now that organization, how long has it been around?
Since 2004.
Okay. Tell me the full name of it again.
Yes, the New York Says Thank You Foundation.
Wow.
And then the offshoot program is Stars of Hope, and that has its own website too. They're based in New York, but are other states, do they have? Yeah, we have like Hope Banks.
They do.
We do, yeah.
That's wow. Is there a website for that people can go and check out?
Yeah. So either the New York Says Thank You, NewYorkSaysThankYou.org, and then I think it's starsofhopeusa.org as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think those are very important for people to know about.
Yeah.
Well, I in my book and in my life, I talk about how very vital it is to have inspiration in our lives. It's for me, it's like the lifeblood in my life. The more inspiration that I can get, the more creative I get, the more I can stay out of depression. And I don't think that I'm alone in that particular path, shall we say. I always ask the question whenever I've done an interview, what is it that I haven't asked that you want people to know, whether it's about how to deal with depression, really how to deal with depression and PTSD and the high emotions that come with living through a disaster. What do you want people to know?
I want people to know that whatever disaster, if they happen to go through one, that to remember they're never alone. There's always someone else part of a disaster. That's why it's a disaster. And to be sure that those who are listening, if you're employers, I would also advise you to, if you don't already, to start thinking about having an internal web page or some kind of resource to be able to have links that are already there that you can direct your staff to be able to help them as well if employers aren't doing that. I noticed a lot of employers are doing that now, sending out different resources for mental health awareness and mental health well-being. So that's something that I would hope that people continue to do even after the height of the pandemic is over. And also, I guess, just realizing the story that it's not so much about depression. In a way, it is. I mean, we think that if we were in a disaster, we would be depressed, and we would be, of course. And rightfully so. But the last story that I shared about Josh and how he turned that event, that horrible traumatic event, into something that was positive and bringing positivity and hope to other active shooters around the world after he experienced the joy and comfort of receiving his own star from somebody else. And I think this makes it so much more real and effective.
I agree, and I'm so glad that you're involved in things like this. I really want to thank you for being here, for doing this. I am so thrilled that you do what you do and the difference that you make every day and internationally, but in Canada, here in the States, wherever there's a disaster, and the light that you bring to so many is very, very clear. I want people to know about your book, and I haven't read it, and it's on order. I'm getting it.
Oh, cool.
Because it's inspiring. It's inspiring, and we all need that. Disaster heroes, invisible champions of help, hope, and healing. Help, hope, and healing. That's so crucial for people who are living with depression or PTSD. And these are very troubled times, and there can't be enough inspiration and champions that we know about. So thank you ever so very much. I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your being here.
Great. It was wonderful to speak with you, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.